Great. Okay. It's wonderful to see you all. I see many very well-known faces here. It's marvelous to see everyone. So it's good. It's always one of the things I like about the Dhamma. One of the things which is very encouraging is when people come back. When you see people once or twice and they kind of disappear, that's always a bad sign. But when they come back, it means that usually means that there is some kind of growth, some kind of positive, association with the Dhamma, and that's marvelous and wonderful. So it's great to see everyone here. I see Eric down there. Is that right? Is that Eric? Sweden, Eric. Hello, Eric. Nice to see you. This is my These are my neighbors from Sweden, so it's nice to kind of know your neighbors as well. So that's great. Hello, Christelle. Nice to see you. So okay, so wonderful. So let's just get going. So let's, as always, do the most important things first, and the most important thing is the practice of whatever we are doing. And right now it's going to be meditation. So let's do some meditation together. Let's get started. Okay, so as always, starting off just by relaxing, by feeling at ease, by sitting in a comfortable position, by allowing yourself just to be yourself, not having to be anyone, not trying very hard, but just enjoying the idea of sitting down peacefully. And if you can do that much, just enjoy the fact of closing your eyes and being at ease and just enjoying this much, then already you are kind of have the right attitude towards meditation practice. Very often, when we start meditation, the mind can be in all kinds of states. Sometimes the mind is ready for meditation. Very often, it may not be really ready for meditation. And if it isn't ready, if you feel a bit restless, you feel a bit tired, you feel you have some desires, whatever it might be, what you have to do is just be patient. And with that patient, with that sense of compassion for yourself, understanding your own mind, understanding the nature of the mind, how it works, how it is conditioned, then gradually you just allow things to calm down. Things always calm down by themselves. If you allow them to calm down, they will calm down. This is just the nature of the mind. So sit back, be patient, have a sense of compassion and kindness towards yourself. And as you do that, gradually, you feel the meditation coming together. And by being patient in this way, just allowing things to be, not controlling, not doing, just allowing things to settle down naturally, there comes a point when you start to feel really at ease, relaxed, hopefully. And if when you do feel relaxed and at ease, the breath also becomes much more delightful to be aware of. So stay with that breath when the body is relaxed and everything is nice. Focus on the delightful aspect of the breath. Feel how the kind of the beautiful rhythm of the breath, the smoothness of the breath, the coolness of the breath. And as you delight in the enjoyable aspect of the breath, the perception tends to become stronger, and the focus becomes more narrow and more, everything becomes more delightful in a sense. And if you can do that, then the whole meditation tends to happen by itself. Okay, so coming close to the end of the meditation, and before you come to the end, to spend a few moments just reflecting on the process of meditation. If you do feel more at ease, more calm, more mindful, or whatever, ask yourself why that is the case. Okay, so that is the end. So please come out. Okay, everyone. So let's carry on. Let's get into a Dhamma-Talk. And the topic that was suggested to me was how to know when to get out of a relationship. And any kind of title can be suitable for a Dhamma-Talk. So it doesn't matter so much what the title is, because many of the principles that we use to decide anything, or how to practice the path or whatever, all of these things are, they are kind of universal principles, and they apply almost regardless of what aspect of life that you are talking about. And so one of the things that we have been discussing at the monastery over the Rains retreat, I just mentioned that last week to the people who were there last week, and that is we were talking about the Four Noble Truths. And of course, the first noble truth is all about dukkha. And I have been talking about dukkha now, the first noble truth, for 5 weeks, and have at least one more week to go on dukkha. And Ajahn Brahm asks me every day, he asks me, have you finished with dukkha now? Are you still teaching dukkha? And I think he's a bit concerned that if we teach too much about dukkha, people will eventually leave the monastery, and they will kind of get the plane ticket and go back to the UK or back to wherever, because they had enough of dukkha. But that is the wrong way of thinking about teaching dukkha. Yeah? It's not really about, it doesn't mean we experience dukkha just because we learn about dukkha. And these are two different things. In fact, when we talk about dukkha, sometimes people will say that, well, this person is not a proper Buddhist, they're not practicing the right way, or they left the monastic life or whatever because they didn't experience enough dukkha. They didn't have enough dukkha in their life. So is that correct? Is that the right way of thinking about it? And the answer is there is some truth to that, but the real truth is that it's not about experiencing dukkha. That's not the main issue. It's about understanding dukkha. That is what the point is about. And so if you do experience dukkha in your life, if you have a bad relationship, all relationships have their problems, Other people are, what is the definition of dukkha? I think Jean-Paul Sartre said the definition of dukkha is other people. So there's always going to be problems with other people, to some extent. But it is what we learn from that is important. It is how we come to understand dukkha that really matters. In fact, dukkha, just experiencing dukkha, doesn't really do anything. Often it makes you really stupid. You experience dukkha and you start drinking alcohol, or you eat more because you need to kind of, comfort food, or you get addicted to whatever. That's a very kind of common thing when we experience dukkha. And so the idea here is that we learn from these things. And any kind of dukkha that you have, if it's pain in the body, if it is bad relationships, if it is whatever, you can learn something from that. Then that becomes part of the practice, part of right view, part of understanding the nature of reality. In fact, to really understand dukkha, you need happiness. Happiness is actually what allows you to understand dukkha. It's one of those really fascinating things. If all you have is dukkha, you can't understand dukkha. The understanding of dukkha arises out of happiness. And this is kind of the whole purpose of the path of meditation. The path of meditation is a path of calming down, a path of experiencing rapture and joy and all of these kind of things. And eventually, of course, all of that, it leads to samadhi. And samadhi is always the foundation for understanding things in the Dhamma. And it just I was just reviewing some of these suttas about the five khandhas and the six sense spaces and dependent origination and the Four Noble Truths recently, and all of them basically say the same thing. If you want to understand these things, the prior condition that you have to have in place to understand any of these things. These are all about reality and how to see the world. It's always samadhi. All the suttas basically say that it's samadhi, then you will see things as they actually are. So happiness, that is what leads to understanding of dukkha. So we want to first of all, get the initial understanding of dukkha. And as we understand dukkha a little bit, we start practicing the spiritual path. Eventually, that leads to happiness that allows you deep meditation. And then that deep meditation then leads eventually to a full and proper understanding of dukkha. And then, of course, by understanding dukkha fully, it doesn't mean that that is kind of hell on earth. Now you have understood dukkha. All you have to experience is dukkha forever because now you have seen it and it's everywhere and it's really problematic. No, it means that if you understand dukkha, actually, that's where happiness arises because then you can let go. And that's kind of the point of understanding this. It allows you to let go. And that letting go is what actually allows a more profound happiness from arising in your life, basically. So this is also how we should deal with relationships. Any kind of relationship we have, whether it is a romantic relationship, if it is a family relationship, a work relationship, a spiritual relationship, a friend relationship, it doesn't really matter. All the relationships that we have in our life, basically we can think of it through that lens of understanding dukkha, understanding the problem. All these relationships are going to be problematic. Sometimes it is very, very rare to have a relationship where you never have any problems. It's almost unheard of. Maybe between the Buddha and Venerable Sariputta, maybe if you have two arahants, maybe then there is no problem. But it's very rare to see two arahants together in this world. It doesn't happen very often. I don't know how many arahants we have here tonight, but I'm not going to ask for a show of hands because it kind of doesn't really work that way. But it is rare. Yeah, we are people who we are trying our best to live good lives, and they're not going to be perfect. And so the idea here then is that with all of these relationships, you should ask yourself, well, when there is dukkha, what can I learn from this? Very often, instead of kind of pushing it away and getting upset and getting angry or whatever, inquire, reflect, contemplate this. There is something to be learned here. And if you use that experience for learning instead of getting upset or getting angry and then kind of keeping the cycle of dukkha going because you get upset with other people, that changes everything because then you become much more positive towards that whole experience of suffering in your life. In any kind of suffering you have, but certainly when it comes to relationships. So have that inquiring mind instead of having the rejecting mind. Dukkha is a possibility for learning. You can learn something about existence. So what exactly can we learn? This is kind of an important point. What can we learn from having a difficult relationship with somebody? What can we get out of that? And there's a large number, I think it's probably an endless number of things you can learn from that. I have had plenty of difficult relationships in my life, including in my monastic life. Sometimes there may be monastics or lay people or whatever, for some reason it doesn't work out or whatever. And so you kind of have to learn from that as well. It's always like that. It doesn't matter where you are. You can't hide from these things. So what can we learn from the difficult relationships or the dukkha of that? And the first thing that we need to learn is to understand the other person. Try to put ourselves in their shoes. Yes, it may be difficult. Yes, it may be hard. But always by understanding, kind of trying to understand from the other person's perspective, it opens up something very powerful. And what it opens up is understanding the conditioning of all beings. The reason very often why we have problems with other people is simply because we see the world differently. Our perspective is so different. We can't see things in the same way. It's one of those, I think, inherent human things, is that we tend to think that other people will see the world just like we see the world. Yeah, because we observe the world. Yeah, that this seems natural to us. Of course, the world is this way. But then they say, no, I see it completely differently. And that is kind of really challenging. And often that challenge can lead to all kind of disharmony and all kind of problems because of that lack of common understanding. So it allows you to understand other people more when there is disharmony, when there is a problem. You understand that they are conditioned in a different way. They view the world differently. They get upset by certain things that you do, maybe, even though you don't mean any harm. Still, it kind of upsets them. Their behavior upsets you, even though they are not even in charge, maybe, of their behavior. The behavior is just a conditioned thing. And you start to see the world through their eyes. And as you do that, it allows you to be much more compassionate for all the people in your life because you start to see that actually we are different in this way. And this idea of conditioning is a very profound thing in the Buddhist teachings. It is the opposite of the sense of self. Yeah, the idea of the self is that we are somehow, we are a person, and that person is reliable, that person is steady, that person is inherent, that person is always there. It can't be always behave in a certain way. But actually, no, it isn't like that. There isn't anything inside of us which is kind of withstands the conditioning of the world, which stands as a separate entity apart from conditions. There is no such thing. All there is conditioning. And when all there is conditioning, then we don't really have a responsibility for how we are conditioned. How can we be responsible for that? The conditions come from the outside. They come from our parents. They come from society. They come from past lives. We are actually trapped by those conditions, every one of us. Even the most difficult people in your life are trapped by the conditioning. And once you understand that the whole thing we call personality, our behavior, everything we are, all of that is something that holds you down, that entraps you, it's like a prison, then you can start to have compassion for everyone in your life. It opens up an alternative view of looking at the world. You don't really get upset with people anymore. You don't get upset with anyone, because how can you get upset with someone who is in prison against their own choice, who is forced to live in a certain way because of conditioning? And this is a beautiful way. If we're able to do this, it's a very beautiful way of thinking about life, because it allows us to let go of all the anger, all the ill will, all the negativity. Even the people you may find the most, the kind of the people you see on the news, or you may find terrible. I'm not going to mention any names, because I think we may have different kind of people who we can't really deal with it. But even them, you start to understand, they too are trapped in that condition. It's a very beautiful way of thinking about the world, because it allows us to let go of things. And it's a very Buddhist way of thinking about the world. It's one of the reasons why in Buddhism, we have this approach, because it is so unique to the Buddhist teachings. It also allows us for more forgiveness and more compassion than almost anyone else. So this is kind of one learning point. They're learning compassion. Another thing that we learn about relationships is we learn that they are dukkha. Yeah, we learn that it is inherent to relationships to have suffering. And we are learning something about the nature of our own life and the life of everyone else. There's always going to be some degree of dukkha there, some degree of problems. That's just the way it is. There's never going to be perfect. And so you take that on board. Yeah, this is what life is like. There is no perfect relationship. It just doesn't exist. But not only that, but what it also tells you is that sometimes we are really bad at choosing friends or partners or even romantic people. We're very bad at choosing the person we think that we're supposed to be kind of our sweetheart or whatever, turns out not to be quite as sweet as we thought. They were actually quite bitter rather than being so sweet. Yeah, well, this is such a nice relationship. It turns out later on that actually it wasn't so great. And we discover that our ability to understand other people, our ability to make good choices is actually very limited. We often make very stupid choices. We don't really understand. And this is one of the problems of the Buddhist path. The whole Buddhist path is a tendency among human beings, because we are blind, because we don't see things as they actually are. There's a tendency to always make stupid choices. If we always made wise choices, every one of you would be enlightened already. The reason you're not enlightened is because you keep on making silly choices. That is basically the reason. Yeah, you don't know where happiness is. You think happiness is over here. Actually, happiness is over there. It's not over there, you know? You know that? It's not there. It's over there. The Buddha. That's where happiness is, yeah? I was very lucky. I was pointing around and the Buddha happened to be there. That was a very fortunate thing. So the Buddha, that's where happiness is, right? So we make all of these silly choices, and it's exactly the same thing with the people in our life. We don't really know how to choose people well. There was a video I saw a while ago. There was a video, he was a psychologist, and he had this video about how we always choose the wrong romantic partner in our life. That was basically the video. And he kind of showed how we are biased by all kind of silliness and stupidity, and we fall in love with the people we're not supposed to fall in love with, and we don't fall in love with the people we're supposed to fall in love with, and we end up making really stupid choices. Then we have all the dukkha that comes from that. So we are blind to a large extent, and for that reason we end up in a kind of very difficult way very often. And so this is also what we learn from this, right? We learn about how our existence is all of these things are so uncertain and so incredibly unreliable. And so by observing and by taking on board the way life actually is, we can learn from all of these difficulties. We can learn from the difficult relationships in our life. However, actually, before I go to the however, I think as a general principle, because one of the things that we need to find out about here is that, well, yes, these relationships may be difficult or they may be good or whatever. At what point do we decide to leave a relationship? Yes, we can learn so much. We can kind of, and if we learn, then often the relationship becomes better because we learn about it. But at what point do we actually have to leave? Is it wrong to leave a relationship in the first place? And the answer to that, no, it is not wrong. From the Buddhist point of view, if something is very difficult, there is no problem with leaving. But we need some kind of guidance of when to leave. And one of the many teachings of the Buddha that I found very useful in this connection. This is a teaching that applies across the board. It applies to relationships. It applies to any kind of decision that you have to make in your life. And that is, as long as you can grow in that relationship, as long as you can grow with that situation that you're in, the monastery you're in, the place you live, the people that are around you, the work you are in, whatever, as long as you grow spiritually. What does it mean to grow spiritually? It means that your good qualities are going up and your bad qualities are going down. You're becoming a better person, more kind, more compassionate. Mindfulness is increasing. Your meditation is becoming more profound. You're finding yourself becoming less angry. If that is what is happening, then that relationship is still doing something positive to you. And what is kind of interesting about this is that very often, if you have a really good relationship, some people have really, really good relationships as well. Sometimes if our life is going too well, we become complacent. Yeah, I know with myself, when my life is kind of going really easy, I'm just enjoying myself and life is going well. And after a while, I stop really reflecting on life. You stop kind of reflecting what is going on because you think life is supposed to be like this. It's supposed to be happy. The relationship are supposed to be right. And you forget the impermanence, the uncertainty that maybe next month, maybe next year, some kind of big thing is going to come to kind of mess up everything. Suddenly COVID comes out of nowhere. Suddenly wars arise out of nowhere. Suddenly the previously nice people in your family turn out not to be so nice. Things change. Things are uncertain. And so very often, if things are going too well, we become complacent. So sometimes if there is a bit of dukkha arising in your life, some problem arising in your life, welcome that dukkha. please come dukkha. Yeah, yay, some dukkha. Now I can learn something. And if you have that kind of attitude towards your dukkha, it means that it's not so much dukkha anymore. Yeah, it reduces the dukkha because you have an attitude of learning from this. Here I have a chance to see something more deeply. And so this idea of learning, of using whatever situation you're in a positive way, as long as you can grow in that situation, as long as that relationship is not so suffocating, so terrible that it allows you to grow, then it may still be positive for you. But the moment you feel suffocated in a relationship, the moment you feel that you are drowning in negative emotions or problems or whatever, that is when it is time to leave. When you feel that your negative qualities are getting worse, there are no positive qualities to be gained from this, at that moment the relationship serves no purpose anymore. And then it is usually you have to say goodbye. Because if it's bad for you, it's going to be bad for the other person, and it's going to be bad for everyone, and it's not really going to work. And it's going to be, if you have children and you are in a relationship, well, actually, it's probably bad for the children as well if you stay together. People often hear this thing, oh, we have to stay together for the children. I often think it's the opposite. You should get divorced for the children, right? Because the children are suffering because the parents not really working out. So I think it's often the other way around. And so often we get these things slightly wrong. Yeah. And so this is kind of how to think about ordinary relationships in life. But there is much more to this than the ordinary relationships in life. There are far more significant things in the Dhamma. And one of the most important kind of relationships are the spiritual relationships that we have. And in spiritual life, you can also have bad relationships and you can have good relationships. In the Dhamma, the good ones are called the Kalyana mittas, yeah, the good friends, and the bad ones are called the Papa mittas. Yeah, Papa is like bad or evil. Mitta is friend. Yeah, it's like the bad friend. So you have bad friends and you have good friends. And we very often we talk about the Kalyana Mitta, the good friends or the spiritual friends or whatever. We don't talk so much about the Papa Mittas on the spiritual path. And yet the Buddha warned against the Papa Mitta. He said it can be incredibly detrimental. In fact, in some of the suttas in the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourse of the Buddha, he says that I see no thing worse in terms of spiritual decline than the bad friend. I see no thing that is more detrimental to you than a bad friend, a bad spiritual friend. So this is incredibly important. And often we think that it is enough to move towards the good spiritual friends. Make sure that we have the Buddha as our spiritual friend. Yeah, this is number one spiritual friend. But actually it is not enough. We also have to watch out for the bad ones. We have to choose our friendships incredibly carefully. And this is kind of the thing. And very often we don't see this. And one of the reasons why we don't see this is because we feel that we have the ability to somehow withstand the influence of bad friends. You may feel strongly inside of you, I am a good person, I live well, I keep the 5 precepts, I treat people in a good way. I can deal with a few bad people, yeah, so let those bad people be my friends, and I will influence them, they will not influence me. But that's wrong. They will influence you, whether you want to or not. You have no choice in the matter. This is just the way it goes. You will be influenced by these people. And this is kind of the whole point here. And the reason why you feel like you will be able to withstand the bad influence of these people is, again, this wrong feeling of a sense of self. The sense of self makes you feel much more solid than you actually are. It makes you feel that you are anchored maybe in certain qualities and certain values that will always be there. But actually there is no real anchoring. There is no point that holds you in that place. Everything is just floating. You're just floating on the ocean. You're not anchored anywhere at all. You're just drifting with the prevailing winds. And the prevailing winds, well, if you have bad friends, those bad friends are the prevailing winds. And you go with the wind of those bad friends, and eventually where will they take you? Well, they will take you to some kind of place where you get shipwrecked. Yeah, you kind of, is the siren song, and then you kind of get shipwrecked according to that. And eventually you are in serious trouble. So the bad friends are really fundamentally problematic. Yeah, and this is kind of sometimes what we don't understand. And so we want to avoid that. And I thought I was going to read out a little sutta for you about kind of some bad friends, because, one of the things that the Buddha says, which is I find also very kind of fascinating, the Buddha says that it is based on good spiritual friends that we make any kind of progress in the Dhamma. And then the Buddha says, by using me, the Buddha says, me as a spiritual friend, in other words, using the Buddha as a spiritual friend, that is how you cross over suffering. That's how you get rid of old age and death and all the problems. He specifically says that. So each one of us should ideally take the Buddha as our spiritual friend. How do we do that? Well, it's by reading the suttas. So today I'm going to introduce you to what the Buddha has to say about bad friends. Yeah. So listen, this is the Buddha's message on bad friends. So see what you think after this. So I'm not sure if I will read out the whole sutta, but I'll read out a little bit of this particular sutta and what the Buddha has to say about them. So this is from the numerical discourses. And the Buddha says there is three kinds of persons to be found in the world. There's a person you should be disgusted by, and that you should not associate with, accompany, or attend to. There is a person you should regard with equanimity, and you should not associate with, accompany, or attend to. There's a person you should associate with, accompany, and attend to. So three kinds of people, right? And the first one, it's kind of extraordinary. The Buddha said you should be disgusted by this kind of person. You would think that that sounds very un-Buddhist, right? How can you be disgusted by other people? Shouldn't we have metta and compassion for everyone? Yes, maybe, but there's also room for disgust occasionally if we focus in the right way and we know what we're doing. Sometimes you just feel repelled by other people for good reasons. Yeah. So what kind of person is that? And the Buddha says the following. Who is this person you should be disgusted by? It is the person who is unethical, who has bad qualities, who is filthy, yeah, with suspicious behavior, underhand, no true ascetic or spiritual practitioner, though claiming to be one, rotten inside, corrupt and depraved. That is the kind of the complete dictionary of bad words for a person who is dodgy. So there you are. And then he says you should be disgusted by such a person, and you shouldn't associate with or accompany or attend to them. Why is that? Even if you don't follow the example of such a person, you still get a bad reputation. Yeah, that person has bad friends, bad companions, and bad associates. They're like a snake that's been living in a pile of dung. Even if it doesn't bite, it still rubs off on you. In the same way, you have the same kind of feeling. That's why you should be disgusted by such a person, and you should not associate with them, accompany, or attend to them. So that is the bad person for you. Yeah, the bad spiritual friend. Someone who is basically completely lacking in morality and ethics. Someone who doesn't live the right life. And basically, the Buddha says, even if you don't follow the example, the word even there is really fundamental because it means, generally speaking, it will rub off to some extent on us the way they live their life. Why? Well, because we are their friend. And if you are their friend, it means that you see some good quality in them. Something is important to that person. And that importantness of the friendship will mean that somehow you will, that bad behavior will also affect you in a negative way. And even if it doesn't affect you all that much, well, you get a bad reputation. Do you want to have a bad reputation? Do you want to have a good reputation? It's nice to have a good reputation, isn't it? And it doesn't matter so much what certain people say. There are some people in the world, we don't really care what they say. But there are, it's nice to have a good reputation with, I don't know, with what would the Buddha say? Yeah, would you want the Buddha to have a good reputation with the Buddha? Or would you want the Buddha to kind of reject you as a dodgy character? It's nice if the Buddha kind of supports you, right? The Buddha, yeah, okay, you're doing the right thing. Yeah, you have good friends. That's kind of handy. But if the Buddha says, okay, I'm not sure if I approve of your friends, then that kind of feels somehow wrong. If someone else says that, that they don't approve of your friends, it doesn't really matter because some people, we don't really care about their example. But this shows you, yeah, that how important this is. You should be disgusted by people who have really bad behavior. That does not mean we don't have compassion for them. You can be disgusted and have compassion at the same time. You still have compassion because you understand that they are destroying themselves. They're going towards a really bad future. So on the one hand, you protect yourself through the disgust. At the same time, you have compassion, and if you have to interact with them, you will interact in a wholesome way. If they are open to your suggestions, maybe they will start going in the right direction here. So this is the first kind of bad friend, right? Then we have the second kind of bad friend. Who is the person you should regard with equanimity? You should not associate with, accompany, or attend to. It is a person who is irritable and bad-tempered. Even when lightly criticized, they lose their temper, become annoyed, hostile, and hard-hearted. They display annoyance, hate, and bitterness. They are like a festering sore, which when you hit it with a stick or a stone, discharge even more. In the same way, someone is irritable and bad-tempered, etc., etc. You should regard that person with equanimity, and you should not associate with, accompany, or attend to them. Why is that? Thinking they might abuse me or insult me or harm me, yeah, or influence you in a bad way. You should regard that person with equanimity, and you should not associate with them. So again, kind of obvious, yeah, the person who is very bad-tempered and not really reasonable, who is impossible to have a proper discussion with, or even, you want to correct them, you want to say something that you have to talk about, they're impossible to talk to. These are not the kind of people we want to hang around. We want reasonable people in our lives. And so again, we have to be very careful. So lastly then, who is the person you should associate with, accompany, and attend to? It is someone who is ethical and of good character. You should associate with, accompany, and attend to such a person. Why is that? Because even if you don't follow the example of such a person, you still get a good reputation. That individual has good friends, good companions and associates. And that's why you should associate with, accompany, and attend to such a person. And then we have this nice little verse at the very end. These are the three people found in the world. A person who associates with an inferior goes downhill, but associated with an equal, you will never decline. Following the best, you will quickly rise up, and you should keep company with people better than yourself. Keep company with people better than yourself. Keep company with the Buddha. Keep company with those people who are of impeccable conduct. Keep company with the arahants in the world. Yeah, look out for people who are special. Carefully investigate them. Know that they are really good people. But when you know that, that is where your company should be kept. Don't feel inferior because you are with superior people. Rather feel lucky to have such people in your life, people who have who are really extraordinary. Right here at Bodhinyana Monastery, we have someone like Ajahn Brahm, and I always love to hang out with Ajahn Brahm. I don't think you don't really know what it's like to hang out with Ajahn Brahm because you see Ajahn Brahm on Zoom and you see someone who tells a few nice jokes and it tells a few nice stories, and that's wonderful. I mean, it's nice to do that. But Ajahn Brahm, actually, in real life, is a very quiet person. He sits there and he just emanates this feeling of peace. He emanates a feeling of kindness and all these kind of qualities. And I know from personal experience that you get affected by that. Yeah, when you feel these qualities coming out of someone else, it's like it seeps into you. You may not want those qualities, you may not even think about it, but you become more kind simply by being in the presence of other kind people. It has this kind of osmosis effect on you. It's very beautiful. If you just read the sutras and you imagine the Buddha, and you imagine this person who never gets angry, who's always equanimous, always at ease, always compassionate, who speaks for your benefit. If you imagine that as you read the sutras, it kind of goes into you in a far deeper way because you have a feeling that you are in the presence of a very powerful, benevolent force in your life. It's very beautiful when you read the sutras in that right way. That should be the people who really support us in our life. And so that is the point here. We abandon the bad people. We choose the right people. We give up the papamitas. We understand almost through direct experience who are the people who have a negative effect on us. And then we move away from that. Sometimes it can be difficult because sometimes there may be family members or whatever. It can be hard to move away. But you do little things, that you can actually have maybe a little bit less contact or whatever. Of course, you do your duties, you have your responsibilities, and you have to do that, but you also know how to manage your time in the wise way. Certain people we don't actually have to be with. Sometimes we can allow ourselves to be not necessarily liked by others. It doesn't matter so much if other people like us or not, especially if they are not good people. We can let go more. We can be a little bit, we have to look after ourselves a little bit more than we often do. And then we move towards the Kalyana Mittas, towards the good friends. And of course, those good friends are so incredibly important. And I always like to come back to the idea where the Buddha and Venerable Ananda are talking about this. And Venerable Ananda says to the Buddha that good spiritual friendship is half of the holy life, half of the spiritual life. And the Buddha says, no, it is not half of the spiritual life. It is all of the spiritual life. And I remember when I first read that, I thought, surely this is crazy. What is the Buddha saying here? It can't be all of the spiritual life. That doesn't make any sense at all. How's that even possible? What about all the other things that we have to do? But of course, the point is, if someone like the Buddha says something like that, then there is something very profound going on. And what is going on is that without those good spiritual friends, without that right view in the world, without seeing the world in the right way, we are not able to navigate properly because we are conditioned. We will just follow the same old patterns, the same old habits that we have always had. And without that person with right view that breaks you out of those habits, allows it to go in a different direction, there is no hope. There is no way out. So it is 100% in the sense that without that, you never even get started on the spiritual path. And for this reason, you have not only that particular sutta where the Buddha says it is 100% of the spiritual life, and by taking me as your guide, you practice the Noble Eightfold Path, you make an end of suffering. But in other places, the Buddha says the very beginning of the path to freedom, the very beginning to the path of insight and understanding, the starting point is always the Sappurisa, the Arya, the noble people in the world. Without that, there is nothing. And so once you start to recognize all of this, you start to understand that choosing the right people in your life actually is very, very important. And so I would suggest to all of you, be really, really careful about this. Understand what you are actually, that this matters enormously because each one of you is far more conditioned than you think you are. You think you understand conditioning, but you don't. All you are is conditioning. There is nothing apart from conditioning. And so all the conditioning that actually then comes back to us. It's so important to choose that in the right way. And the Kalyanamitta, the good spiritual friend, the avoidance of the bad friend, is a very, very important part of this. So take it really, really seriously. And as you do that, then things start to unfold in the right way as a consequence. And this idea of Kalyanamitta is something which grows on you, over time. Maybe initially you have some idea what the Kalyanamitta is, and as you practice a spiritual path, the idea of that Kalyanamitta, who you can really trust, the idea of the Buddha as the supreme spiritual teacher, it starts to become more clear, more obvious what is going on. You grow closer to these teachers. You become more a real disciple of the Buddha. And the more real disciple of the Buddha you are, of the real Dhamma, the Saddhamma, the more you have a true Kalyanamitta in your life. This is what taking refuge is all about. When you take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma Sangha, you are saying you're taking the Buddha as your Kalyanamitta and also any other Aryans that may be around. That is the power of refuge. You have a place to go. You have real friends. You're moving away from all the negative things and moving towards the positive instead. Then the path starts to become much more powerful as a consequence. Anyway, I believe I have talked enough. And so that is just the idea of how to deal with, I'm not sure if I really answered the question that was asked, but how to deal with kind of bad relationships. But hopefully there is something in there that you can use for your benefit. So if anyone would like to ask any questions or you'd like to comment on anything, you are most welcome to do so. So please go for it. Casey.
Thank you, first of all, Ajahn, for your talk. This is a really, I found it really valuable to think about as a context for thinking about friendship. But I wanted to ask, because you mentioned having some difficult relationships in your own life, and I wondered if you could give us an example of how you navigated this using some of the principles that you talked about.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So it's a while ago now, but I remember fairly early on in my monastic life, there were people I found really hard to deal with because they just thought about the world in a very different way, and I just couldn't really relate to them. And from my point of view, I didn't feel whatever. It doesn't really matter, but it was kind of difficult in dealing with them. And so I use precisely these ideas that I was talking about before, the idea, understanding that these are people, they are conditioned. They are like this not because they want to annoy me. They weren't born into this world just to make my life difficult. That's not kind of how it works. And so when I started to realize that, I started to feel, actually, they really have a problem because I wasn't the only one who was having problem with these people. Many people were having problem with them. It's often like that. If someone is very difficult, they tend to become a bit like, almost like an outcast because no one really likes them. No one can really deal with them. And so once you start to see that the reason why they're difficult is very often because of some profound suffering in their life and because they have some, their conditioning is such that they can't really be any other way. I was able to develop more compassion for them, and that's what I did. And then once you start to develop compassion for that person, because what you actually understand is you understand a universal principle. You don't understand something specific about that person. It might be specific to that person, but it's also a universal idea of how to think about people. So by having more compassion for them, you realize actually we're all in the same situation. We're all in the same boat. And so actually this is true for everyone. And so you then bring that with you and you apply it to everyone else in the world as well. And so that was the main thing I learned. I just learned to be more compassionate in my life. So often we focus on ourselves. Oh, they are doing something towards me. I have to bear all of this suffering. But that actually is not a very wise way of thinking about things. And the reason is because actually it's always going to be like that. There's always going to be people in the world that are difficult. We have to deal with that. We have to just accept that. So instead of thinking about me and my suffering, try to understand them. And the moment you understand them and the moment you have compassion for them, actually your suffering is greatly diminished. It almost disappears entirely because now you have compassion, and that compassion is a beautiful feeling. You're no longer focused on yourself. Instead, you're focused on the other person. And so this kind of self-centeredness that is natural to all of us is actually it's a very useless way of thinking about the world. And by turning the tables, turning things around, focusing on the other person instead, that is where so much of the solution is found in this. So that's one thing. Another interesting thing is sometimes people are difficult, but sometimes you get upset by really nice people. You know what it's like? Sometimes you may read a sutta by the Buddha and think, what is the Buddha saying? I don't agree with it. What is he talking about here? Oh, the Buddha. I'm not sure if, why, how enlightened was he after all? or whatever it is that we think, yeah? And sometimes the best people in the world, we get annoyed with them. And at that point, you also learn something about yourself. You learn something about your own defilements. You learn something about your own attachments. You are maybe attached to a certain view, a certain perspective, a certain way. You think people should behave in a certain way. But actually, there's many kinds of behavior which may be annoying to me, really annoying to me, but it's got nothing to do with badness in the other person, just the way they are. They're just different from me. So why am I allowing that to be annoying to myself? And so you learn something about yourself, about kind of, okay, these things are crazy. I'm attached to stupid things in my life. Let it go. Let it be. Other people will have to be the way they should be. And so you allow people more room and more kind of, maneuvering in that sense. Anyway. All right. Christelle, please.
Thank you very much, Ajahn. I've got a question. It's more about meditation. My life goes around Dhamma mainly. I don't have any entertainment. I mean, I don't have TV or radio or anything. The only thing I indulge in is like I love animals. So sometimes I look at videos about people helping animals or rescuing animals or cats. And then I realize, and it gives me joy. It gives me joy to see that other people are helping animals. But then I realized that sometimes when I meditate, these images, they come when I try to. So I was wondering whether I should stop watching them, although it brings me joy. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
It's silly. I don't know. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a good question. I think what often happens is that the mind wants to kind of play with something, and if it doesn't play with those animal videos, it might play with something else instead. So you have to know your mind and what is the best way to get it in the right spot. If you find that not watching the videos actually makes you more peaceful, then maybe you should stop. But you may just find that the mind latches onto something else instead, and then it kind of doesn't really make all that much difference. So try instead to use those videos when they replay in your mind, those videos. Use it as an opportunity for compassion. Yeah, so you bring the more compassion into your meditation practice. So you use that feeling and then you bring the feeling up. And then when the feeling is there, then maybe you can let go of the video and you can go with the feeling and add that to your breath or add that to something positive. And then it becomes a positive thing. So there isn't any absolute answer one way or the other. You have to know kind of yourself and your own mind and how your own mind works. So depending on what the alternative is and how you're able to use that for your meditation, see what works. Yeah. Great. Okay. Very good. Okay. Yes, Surakshi.
Thank you, Ajahn Brahmali. I'd like to ask about children. So I work with children and I have nieces and a nephew. And when you observe them having friendships and going through suffering with friendships, and you can see how some friendships are helpful and some aren't helpful, how is the best way to support them? Because they're young and they want to have friends. And sometimes, you've got social media and different influences impacting on them. Yeah. So how do we support them in a helpful way rather than in a way that can be unhelpful?
Okay, yeah, that is probably very difficult. I can imagine. I have no idea, to be honest with you. But I suppose that by just generally being kind, that you can be a kind of a refuge for these children. If they're having a difficult time or whatever, they can always come to you, and they can kind of take you as a kind of refuge. Everyone loves kindness. Everyone is attracted to kindness, and children will know if you have that kindness in you, and then they will know that there is a place they can go to, kind of to seek that kindness. But you can also, if they have a lot of suffering because of friendships, you can also maybe, you can do very practical things like, dividing the class up in a certain ways when they play or when they do things, so that the divisions are according to people who get along reasonably well. Maybe practical things like that can be done. I don't know, so that you kind of minimize any friction or difficulties. You can also teach them. Yeah, some of these teachings that we have been talking about now are valid for everyone. Yeah, tell them that if you find someone difficult, then remember that often it is because they already have something difficult inside of them. They already have some suffering, right? So when someone, you feel someone is treating you badly, whatever, don't get angry with them. Instead, be kind to them, be compassionate, because maybe they have some suffering inside. So teach them some basic Dhamma principle that will allow them to reframe the situation, which might be difficult or whatever, and then maybe they can overcome it. But in general, very often with these things, you have to, one of the very important things in any kind of situation where we are dealing with difficulties is to have mindfulness and to have enough awareness that we can often make spontaneous decisions on the spot because we know what is right. And very often the decisions are kind of obvious once we are there, or they may not be obvious, but if our mind is in a pure state and in a peaceful state, then we can often make decisions right there and then that actually will work. We can use our intuition, our understanding to make things come out in a positive way. So it is hard. And sometimes, life is like that. Life is a really tough school. And we have to actually go through a lot of suffering. Often we have to learn these things ourselves. We have to deal with it. And that is often the reality. If I look back upon my life, there's been many difficult times. That's kind of the reality of it. But hopefully I have learned something. Hopefully I have come out on the other side. And as long as you're not permanently damaged, as long as you're able to deal with it in a way that gives rise ultimately to good qualities and a spiritual path or whatever, then maybe you have been using that dung to fertilize the tree, and you get some nice mangoes coming out of the other end, or nice apples maybe in the UK or whatever it is. But anyway, yes, good luck. Okay, Carmen, you want to say something? Yeah.
Yes. Hello, Ajahn. Thank you very much for this Dhamma-Talk, which touches some of my topics I'm thinking about often. And I have a question. If I am surrounded by people, they are not actually bad people, but they affect me negatively because they have their own suffering. And I have also not a sangha at my place here, so I can talk to people personally. So is it then better to say I have no friends than friends who affect me negatively? This is the first. And the second part of my question is what to do if I feel overwhelmed by that negativity, that negative outlook on life. They are not bad people, but all that suffering and my own suffering and everything. So in meditation, apparently there doesn't come up enough happiness yet to deal with that. So do you have something to share how to deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, you have to know your own needs. It's having no friends. It sounds like a very lonely life to me, having no friends. It may be too much. Yeah, can you really have no friends? We are social beings. We need some social interaction. So I'm not sure if I would recommend you to have no friends, but know what know what works for you. Withdraw a little bit, have less contact. Yeah, have the right amount of contact. Don't be afraid of saying no sometimes. Sometimes we are very afraid of saying no to our friends, but we all have good reasons for saying no sometimes. Other people shouldn't expect us to always be available as a friend. Sometimes saying no is fine. Okay, no, not now is not really suitable for me. Yeah, I have become more of a meditator. I spend more of my time on meditation. Please don't take this personally. Right now is not a good time for me. Whatever it is, yeah, you say it in a nice way. And so it's about finding balance. But know what you need. Don't reject people too quickly, because suddenly you find you've gone too far the other way and you feel lonely. There's no one in the world for me anymore. And things become just as bad in the other direction. So be gentle. Yeah, do this in a kind of balanced kind of way. And then hang out with your, it's great that you come here. At least you have some kind of community that you can hang out with a little bit. Yeah. I mean, these are all great people. I know many of the people here. And so that is a community. It is kind of useful. So you kind of lean more in that direction. And I think one of the kind of real reasons why, one of the things the Buddha says, actually, which I forgot to say in the suttas, he says that the way to overcome bad friendship is not just to give it up, but the way to overcome it is to actually have good spiritual friendship. Yeah. So, and in other words, you let go of the bad ones gradually by getting good ones instead. Because you cannot have no friends. I think that's maybe the reason. And so you kind of move from one direction. So it's not about giving up the bad ones. It's more about building up positive relationships in another area. And then the whole thing tends to come together as a consequence. So see what you can, how this finding this balance is really important. Gradually build up something positive in another area and see you can find this kind of work out for you somehow. Yeah. There is no absolute truth with these things, yeah. So, yeah, please. Okay. So one more. Who else? One more person. Karina? No, that was
Yes.
Karina. There you are. Please, yeah.
Thank you, Ajahn, for the talk. Yes, I have a question. Well, you were talking about like keeping those people who have this negative impact on us. Sometimes we need to, keep them at a distance, or perhaps sometimes cut them out of our lives, if possible. I'm just wondering how to. I struggle sometimes to deal with the guilt of that, of doing this, because unfortunately this is something that had to happen in my life a few times. But I've noticed that it's particularly difficult when it comes to a close family member whose toxicity basically is not good for me, and I can't cut them out completely. They're at a distance. However, I've noticed there's wafts of guilt sometimes of doing so. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice of how I can deal with this in a way that I don't harm myself. I do have a compassion for the person, but sometimes all these emotions are just coming out. And I struggle with that at times. So I'd be grateful for advice.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, I think one of the things there is that, we need to have self-compassion as well. It's not just about compassion for others, it's about self-compassion. And you need to know, every one of us needs to know that we are so influenced by the world around us, and we are so a product of those things. And once you start to understand that, you understand that, why, but basically you start to have compassion for yourself, because you understand precisely that your ability to live your life as you want it is very limited. You are influenced by all of these kind of things. And so if you understand that certain things have a negative influence on you, that self-compassion says I have to limit those things. Yes, I have compassion for the person. I also have compassion for myself. And so you find a balance between the two. And very often the compassion for the other person, it is not necessarily the case that, they will always thrive just because we are around them more. Sometimes by pulling back a little bit, that can also be a positive thing for them. Maybe that makes them think. Maybe that makes them reflect in a new way, understanding their own life in a new way. Sometimes, we need a reminder that things aren't right. Why isn't something working out? And that can be, sometimes that can be good for the other person as well. It's like, if you are, at school, maybe you are, punished in a mild way or something, and maybe something of that kind of mild punishment, not the kind of harsh, but something very, very mild, or at least being spoken to or something, opens up something inside of you. It allows you to see things in a new way. And so it is not necessarily bad, these things that we, letting someone go a little bit. It may actually change them more than always being around, always, trying to be compassionate. Maybe they never learn anything from that. And so don't think that you know the best for the other person. You don't. And so by letting go, actually, maybe that is better for them. You just don't know what is best for them. And because of that, the guilt actually doesn't make any sense. Once you start to think about these things, and hopefully the guilt will just disappear, because you know that actually there was probably a misunderstanding in the first place, that you really knew what was best for the other person. And so go more with your own feeling. Don't let go of the other person completely. Just kind of withdraw a little bit more, find the right kind of balance. And then as you find the new kind of balance in the relationship, then hopefully that will be beneficial actually for both of you in the long run. That's what I would suggest. Anyway, I think we have come to the end, so I have to hand back to Manori again. So Manori, please, if you can wrap up the session today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ajahn Brahmali, for this wonderful talk. And thank you all the Kalyana Mittas who have joined today. And I like to say a few words about dana, the generosity. Giving develops wholesome qualities that form the foundation of our Dhamma practice. So generosity can be practiced in checking in deeply with us as well. And also the Buddha said that the wisest way to give is when one gives with heart full of joy for the purpose of beautifying the mind, for equipping the mind, for the practice of serenity and insight, taken from Anguttara 8.33. So many of you know that here at Anukampa, we offer several ways that we can cultivate this beautiful quality of generosity as well. So there is this one-time donation financially. There is a donation link in our website, Anukampa website, where you can do a bank transfer or donate through PayPal or sum up at any amount that you're financially capable of. If you are able, you can do a regular donation through banking, through standing orders. And also, if you have any special qualities that you can help Anukampa, any expertise, please contact team@anukampaproject.org for volunteering. So we will need, volunteers in, different strengths. Once Venerable Chanda comes, we will need, and the Anagarikas come, we will need meals for the monastics, and then there will be needed items as well at that time. And thank you very much again for being part of the community, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye, everyone. See you next time. Bye.
Thank you, Ajahn, again.
Bye.